I was holding my sister's wedding invitation when Mom told me the words that cracked something inside me, Laura. It was last weekend. The paper trembled in my hands, the gold lettering suddenly meaningless. "What do you mean last weekend?" I asked, my voice sharp and rising. Mom's eyes flicked to the kitchen window, her spoon clinking against her mug. "You must have mixed up the dates," she said. I looked again. The card clearly said Saturday, June 12th. Tomorrow. My throat went dry. "No, Mom, look." I pushed the invitation toward her, but she didn't even glance down. "It's done," she said softly, like it was a minor misunderstanding. The words hit like a slap. "It's done." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, loud and cruel. Outside, the Oregon rain drummed against the window pane. "So everyone was there?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. Mom nodded without looking up. "It was small. Family only." I laughed, one sharp, broken sound. "Family only," I repeated. "Right." The invitation slipped from my hand and hit the counter with a soft thud. All week I'd been planning dress-themed hair appointment, booked gift wrap. I'd even taken a few days off from work. My little sister Emily's big day was supposed to be tomorrow, and I'd wanted everything to be perfect. I'd imagined us laughing, maybe crying, hugging after the ceremony. Instead, my own mother had looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong there. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom just sighed. "It wasn't intentional, Laura. The planner sent the wrong invites to a few people." She said it with a finality that made my stomach twist. "A few people?" I asked. "Anyone else in this few not blood related to you?" Her mouth tightened. "Don't make this harder than it already is." I stared at her, trying to see some flicker of guilt, but there was none. Only discomfort. Only avoidance. Dad shuffled into the kitchen, then, still in his worn robe, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone half-hearted. Mom didn't answer, just gave him a look. He hesitated, then said softly, "Let's not do this now." I turned toward him. Did you know his silence told me everything? Something inside me went still. No shouting, no tears, just a spreading icy calm. "I see," I said. "You all decided this together." Mom shook her head quickly. "No, Laura. Don't twist this. Don't." Would I cut her off? "Don't point out the obvious. You had a wedding without me." Her jaw clenched. "It wasn't personal." That line broke me. "Not personal. It's my sister's wedding, Mom. I helped pay for part of it, the photographer. Remember, the deposit went on my card because Emily was short that month." She didn't answer. The air in the kitchen felt thick, like breathing through water. I stared at the woman who raised me, the man who watched in silence, and realized I was the only one shocked by this. They had planned it, discussed it, decided it. "I'm leaving," I said finally. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, flat, final. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and walked out before either of them could respond. Outside, the rain hit harder, blurring the driveway into gray streaks. I climbed into my car and sat for a long moment staring at the windshield as water pooled across the glass. My reflection looked unfamiliar, older, smaller somehow. The silence in the car was deafening. My phone lit up on the passenger seat, a notification from Emily's social media. I opened it without thinking. The screen filled with a photo, her in a white dress, laughing beneath an arch of flowers. Mom and Dad stood beside her, smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. "Proud of our only daughter," the caption read. The words cut deeper than any scream could have. Only daughter. I scrolled through the comments, hundreds of them. "Congratulations, beautiful family. Lucky parents." Not one mention of me. I set the phone down, my pulse pounding in my ears. The rain became a wall of sound. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day I showed up for them one more time. But they'd already shown up for each other and left me out of the picture completely. I started the car, the engine humming low. My eyes stung, but no tears came. I didn't want to cry, not for them. I drove aimlessly for a while through the streets of Portland past coffee shops and couples holding umbrellas past the familiar turn that led to my apartment. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. At a red light, I caught my reflection again in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I saw not someone excluded, but someone erased. How long had it been like this? Years of being the dependable one, the responsible daughter who fixed their problems, paid their debts, filled the silence. Every crisis they called me, every celebration they forgot. I thought of the money I'd wired Emily when her design business was failing. $10,000 gone with a promise to pay me back that never came. I thought of the $30,000 I gave Mom and Dad to repair the leaky roof on the family home, and how the only thank you I'd received was a passing. "You're a blessing, sweetheart." I used to think it was love. Now it just felt like currency. By the time I reached my condo downtown, the rain had turned to mist. I parked, sat still for a moment, then exhaled a long, trembling breath. The invitation still sat on the passenger seat, water-warped edges curling. I picked it up and read the gold script one last time. "Emily and Daniel invite you to celebrate their union, Saturday, June 12th, 2 p.m. tomorrow." The lie stared back at me. I crumpled the paper in my hand and let it fall to the floor. Inside my apartment, everything was neat, quiet, untouched by their world. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse on the couch, and stared out the window at the city lights shimmering through the mist. Somewhere across town, my family was celebrating, posting photos, raising glasses, pretending I didn't exist. I whispered into the empty room, "Family only." "Huh?" A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Then, as the silence settled again, a different thought formed. Clear, calm, solid. "They think I'm easy to erase. They'll learn otherwise." I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared out at the skyline. The lights reflected off the glass, sharp and steady. Tomorrow I was supposed to show up as the proud sister. Instead, I'd show up as something else entirely. Because if they'd taught me anything, it was this: sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop waiting for an invitation. The next morning, I sat in a cafe downtown, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The rain had stopped, but everything outside still looked gray, like the whole city was holding its breath. I scrolled through my phone without thinking until I saw Emily's wedding post. She'd uploaded more photos overnight. One caught my eye, Mom standing beside her, both beaming, champagne glasses raised. The caption said, "So proud of my only daughter." My chest tightened. I reread those words over and over. Only daughter. It was a tiny phrase, but it hollowed me out. My hand shook as I set the phone down, the cup rattling against the saucer. The people around me chatted, laughed, typed on laptops, normal life, moving on while mine stood still. I whispered under my breath, "Only daughter, huh?" A man at the next table glanced up, then quickly looked away. I almost laughed at how absurd it was, being erased in real time while drinking bad coffee. The memories came rushing in one after another. It had always been Emily. She was the darling, the golden child. Even as kids, she got the bigger slice of cake, the front seat, the benefit of the doubt. I was the one expected to clean up, to compromise, to be understanding. When I was 12, she broke Mom's favorite vase and blamed it on me. I took the punishment without a word because Mom was crying and Emily was trembling, and I thought that's what good sisters did. When I was 16, Dad lost his job for a few months. I picked up shifts at a diner after school, handing over tips to help with groceries. Emily was 14, then Mom said she was too young to work, too fragile for stress. She still got piano lessons while I learned how to count bills and smile through exhaustion. I thought those sacrifices meant something. That being dependable earned love the same way charm did. The pattern never changed. When I got a full scholarship to Oregon State, Dad said, "Maybe stay local, help your mom a bit." I did. Emily went to Seattle for design school, and they threw her a going-away party with a cake that said, "Dream big, sweetheart." When I graduated, Mom barely mentioned it. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. The bitterness felt right. 3 years ago, when Emily's interior design firm nearly collapsed, she called me crying at midnight. Her voice shook. "Please, Laura. I just need a little help. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I wired her $10,000 the next morning. She never mentioned it again. No thank you, no repayment, just silence. 2 summers ago, Mom and Dad's roof started leaking. They called, panicked, saying the foundation was cracking too. $30,000. I dipped into my savings, told them not to worry. They said, "You've always been the practical one." I thought that meant appreciation. Looking back, it meant utility. I used to tell myself that's what family was, showing up even when they didn't. But sitting there in that cafe reading My Only Daughter, I realized how one-sided it had always been. I closed my eyes and saw the night of their anniversary party last year. They'd rented a place near the lake, the same house I'd helped them secure the down payment for. The whole extended family came. I covered the catering bill, telling myself it was a gift. During dinner, Mom raised her glass and said, "Here's to Emily and Daniel, our pride and future." I smiled, clapped, pretended it didn't sting. Later, when everyone took family photos, she said, "Let's just do one with Emily and Daniel first." They never called me to join afterward. I'd spent my entire life being part of the background of their happiness. The barista passed by asking if I wanted a refill. I shook my head. My stomach felt tight, like grief had taken physical form. I opened my email out of habit and noticed a new message from the county property office. A line caught my eye: Lake Oswego property taxes due next month. My name was listed as the account holder. I frowned, confused. My name, I'd forgotten that detail. Years ago, when Mom and Dad were struggling, I'd handled the purchase. They'd wanted a vacation place but didn't qualify for the loan, so I'd bought it in my name. They promised to cover maintenance, but somehow the bills had always come to me. I closed the email and exhaled. Maybe that house was the only thing in my life that truly belonged to me. The doorbell over the cafe door jingled, and I looked up, startled. It wasn't them, of course. It was never them. For a moment, I imagined walking into their house, holding the invitation, demanding answers. I could already see Mom's face, tight, defensive, and Emily pretending guilt she didn't feel. What good would that do? They'd twist it again, make me look unreasonable. They always did. I took out my phone and scrolled to my messages with Emily. The last one was from months ago. "You're amazing, sis. Couldn't do any of this without you." That was when she'd borrowed money again for a marketing push. I'd believed her. I locked the screen. "No more," I said softly. For once, the words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a promise. Outside, the clouds were parting, streaks of sunlight breaking through. It was almost cruel how beautiful the day had become. I sat there until my coffee grew stone cold and my heart settled into something quieter than sadness, resolve. When I finally stood, the waitress smiled. "You wanted to go, cup?" I shook my head. "No, I'm done." I left cash on the table and stepped out into the street, the air sharp and clean after the rain. My phone buzzed as I crossed toward my car. A text from an unknown number: "Laura, this is Nina. Call me tonight. It's about your sister's wedding." Nina Clark, my old friend from college, now a lawyer. We hadn't talked in months, but I trusted her instincts. The timing made my pulse quicken. I slipped into my car, staring at the text. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked different, steadier. They'd built a lifetime of taking from me, of deciding who I was allowed to be. Maybe that stopped tonight. I drove home slowly, windows down, letting the air cool my face. At a red light, I looked at the invitation still crumpled on the passenger seat. Its edges were torn now, gold foil peeling. I smoothed it out with my hand and stared at the date, June 12th, mocking me in elegant cursive. My sister got everything she wanted: admiration, attention, and a family willing to bend the truth for her. But what she didn't realize was that I'd learned something from her too. How to play quietly, how to wait until timing did the work for me. The light turned green. I pressed the gas. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I sat with my phone in my lap, reading Nina's message again. "Call me tonight." My finger hovered over the dial for a moment before I pressed it. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Laura Nina's voice came through low but urgent. "I need to tell you something about the wedding." The sound of her tone made my heart tighten. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Not over the phone. Can you meet tomorrow?" I stared at the dark glass of the window, my own reflection looking back at me calm but alert. "Yeah," I said finally. "Tell me where." When I hung up, I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed outside, alive and indifferent. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was sinking. I felt still. Whatever Nina knew, I'd be ready to hear it, because the truth couldn't hurt more than the lie already had. I couldn't sleep that night. The city outside my window pulsed with life-distant sirens' laughter from a passing car, but inside my apartment, everything was too still. I sat at my desk, laptop open, scrolling through my financial records. Every line felt like a bruise I'd ignored for too long. 10 years of transactions told a story I hadn't wanted to face. "They only call when something breaks," I muttered to myself. The dates stretched back to my 20s. Mom's dental bill, Dad's truck, repairs, Emily's temporary business loan that turned permanent. Every few months, a new crisis. Every time my bank account bled a little more. At first I'd called it love, later obligation. But tonight, looking at the endless list of withdrawals, I saw it for what it was: dependence dressed as family. 3 years ago, Emily's business had crashed after a client backed out. She'd cried over the phone, said she couldn't breathe, couldn't sleep. I'd wired $10,000 the next morning. "I'll pay you back as soon as the new contract starts," she'd promised. She never did. Not even a thank you. 2 years later, Dad called about the roof again. "It's leaking into the living room," he'd said. "Your mom's freaking out. We might lose the house." I'd been in the middle of a project meeting, but I left work early, drove to their place in West Lynn, and handed him a check for $30,000. He'd hugged me, muttering, "You're a good girl." It sounded like praise, but looking back, it was ownership. They didn't see me as a daughter anymore. I was the fix the fund, the fallback plan. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. The quiet in the apartment pressed against me like a weight. My phone buzzed a text from Nina, still on for tomorrow, coffee 10 a.m. Riverside Cafe. "Yes," I replied. Then, almost without thinking, "I think I'm ready to know." The next morning, I arrived early. The Riverside Cafe overlooked the Willamette River, sunlight cutting across the water in pale gold lines. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window staring out. Nina walked in a few minutes later, her hair pulled into a low bun, a folder tucked under her arm. She looked the same sharp calm, the kind of presence that grounded chaos. "Laura," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "You okay?" "I've been better," I said quietly. "You said it was about the wedding." She exhaled, glancing around before leaning in. "I didn't want to tell you this unless I was sure, but I talked to someone who worked for the event planner your sister hired." I froze. Nina's voice was steady, but soft. "Your mother told the planner to send your invitation to the wrong list. She said she didn't want any tension on Emily's day." Tension, I repeated the word sharp on my tongue. She also said, "And I'm sorry for this, she didn't want you there because you draw attention." For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the espresso machine behind us. "Because I draw attention?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Nina nodded. She said, "You intimidate Emily. That your job, your independence, those things make her feel small." I sat back, the words hollowing me out. I thought of all the years I'd made myself smaller for them, staying quiet, when they belittled my choices, helping when they didn't ask nicely, avoiding confrontation, because I thought family meant keeping peace. "God," I said, laughing softly, bitterly. "So being successful means I'm a threat now?" Nina's eyes softened. "Toxic families don't celebrate your success, they manage it." The truth settled in my chest like lead. I looked out the window, watching a couple walk by hand in hand. I'd always imagined moments like this would make me furious, but what I felt was worse: clarity. I was the one who held everything together, I said slowly. and they decided I didn't fit the picture. Nina nodded. It's not about what you did wrong, it's about control. You stopped needing them, and that scares people who depend on your weakness. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness cutting through the numbness. You know what's funny, I said? When they were broke, I was family. When they needed help, I was reliable. But the second I stopped being useful, I became inconvenient. She tilted her head. So what are you going to do? I thought about it. Really thought. The question wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclaiming something I'd let them take for years, my boundaries. First, I said I stopped financing their comfort. Nina smiled faintly. That's a start. We talked for another hour about the legalities of ownership, how my name was still on the Lake Oswego property deed, how I could assert control if I wanted to. By the time we finished, the sun had shifted high above the river, scattering light across the window like glass shards. When I got back home, I sat at my dining table with a fresh notebook and began writing down everything the money I'd sent. The property details, even the text threads where Emily promised repayment. It wasn't anger driving me anymore, it was record-keeping. Proof. The hours passed quietly, sunlight fading into dusk. I didn't turn on the lights. Around 8, my phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. Your mom's worried. Can you help us with the lake house insurance this month? I stared at it, half expecting the old reflex, the automatic, sure, I'll handle it. Instead, I typed one word, no, then deleted it. Then typed again, you'll have to sort that out yourselves. My finger hovered over send. I pressed it before I could change my mind. The second the message went through, something uncoiled inside me. I leaned back, breathing out for what felt like the first time in years. The phone stayed silent. No reply. I looked across my apartment, the soft light spilling from the kitchen onto the hardwood floors. Everything here was mine, bought with my own work, my own effort, my own peace. I walked to the window. The sky was streaked with orange, fading into deep blue. Somewhere in that big suburban house, they were probably arguing about bills about me, about how ungrateful I'd become. And for once, I didn't care. My gaze drifted toward a folder sitting on my desk, the one with the property deed I'd signed 5 years ago. The Lake Oswego house. I flipped it open and scanned the header. Primary owner, Laura Mitchell. My name? Not theirs. I hadn't noticed it before, not really. Back then, it was just another favor. Another rescue. But now the sight of it made my pulse steady. I whispered to myself, they think I'm powerless. Let's see how they react when they realize I own everything they built their lies on. I closed the folder and slipped it into my bag. Tomorrow I'd bring it to Nina. It was time to stop being their safety net and start being the storm they never saw coming. The city lights blinked on outside my window as night settled over Portland. I stood there a while, watching reflections ripple across the glass, feeling the quiet kind of strength that comes after breaking. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The rain started again the next morning, soft and steady, tapping against my kitchen window like a metronome. I sat at the counter, staring at the folder with the property deed I'd found the night before. My name, Laura Mitchell, was printed cleanly at the top. Seeing it there still felt unreal. I traced the letters with my fingertip as if confirming that yes, I existed somewhere in this mess, and no, they couldn't erase me from everything. My phone buzzed right at 9. Nina. I'm heading to the office early, her text said. Bring the documents. We'll talk through it all. By the time I arrived, the sky over downtown Portland had turned the color of wet concrete. Nina's office was in a restored brick building, with tall glass windows that made everything look sharper, more deliberate. She was already waiting by her desk when I walked in sleeves, rolled up coffee steaming beside her laptop. Morning, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched mine. You ready? I nodded and handed her the folder. This is the property deed for the Lake Oswego house. My parents have been using it for years, renting it out, claiming it as theirs. She opened the file, flipping through pages quickly. You bought it outright. Yeah, I said, pulling out a chair. 5 years ago. They didn't qualify for the loan, so I did it. I covered everything: down payment, closing fees. I thought I was helping. Nina scanned a line on the deed, her brow lifting slightly. You didn't just help, you own it. Her words landed heavy, final. For a long moment, I just sat there feeling that truth sink in. All the years they'd treated me like an outsider, and all along the ground they stood on literally belonged to me. Nina looked up. This house, Laura, it's your leverage. They've built comfort on your generosity, and that means you hold all the cards now. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. So what do I do? Well, she said, setting the file aside. That depends on what you want. You can reclaim the property, legally freeze their rental income, even file a cease and desist for unauthorized use. But I need you to understand, once you go down this road, there's no turning back. I smiled faintly. They already closed that road when they cut me out of the wedding. Nina nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. She poured me a cup of coffee from the pot on her desk. I did some digging after our call last night, she said. A friend of mine works at the event company your sister used. I asked a few questions just to confirm what we already suspected. My stomach tightened, and she hesitated, then met my eyes. Your mom specifically told them to keep you off the guest list. She said she wanted a stress-free day and didn't want any tension with her older daughter. I laughed softly, disbelieving. Stress-free, I repeated. That's a good way to describe erasing someone. Nina pushed the cup toward me. It gets worse. Apparently Emily told the planner that you'd probably show up trying to take over the event if you found out. I froze, staring at the black coffee. The steam blurred for a second before it faded completely. I didn't even call her after the invite arrived, I said quietly. I just showed up with a gift ready to help. They must have known that. They must have planned it. Nina's expression softened. I'm sorry, Laura. I shook my head. No, don't be. It's clarifying. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the window like silver threads. I remembered the way Mom had looked at me that morning in her kitchen, guilty but not sorry. The way Dad had said nothing. The way Emily had smiled in that photo under the caption, my only daughter. They wanted me gone because I make them uncomfortable, I said. Because I work hard, because I don't need anyone to rescue me. Nina's voice was steady. You've outgrown their control. That's what this is really about. I exhaled, my jaw tight. Then maybe it's time they feel what it's like to lose control. Nina's smile was small but knowing. Then we'll start here with what's rightfully yours. We spent the next hour going through documents, tax records, rental agreements, proof of ownership. Nina highlighted lines, made notes, drafted letters. I watched her work, the rhythmic scratch of her pen grounding me. Every click of her stapler felt like a quiet act of justice. When she was done, she leaned back and said, We'll file an ownership notice with the county today. Once it's official, they won't be able to rent or sell without your consent. I nodded, feeling something shift inside me, not rage, not joy, but relief. Let's do it. By noon, the papers were ready. Nina printed 2 copies and handed one to me. Keep this safe, she said. It's the start of your clean slate. I tucked the folder under my arm, thanked her, and stepped back into the rain. Driving home, I thought about everything she'd said. The words replayed in my head. You've outgrown their control. Maybe that was why they hated me. Maybe that was why they'd pretended I didn't exist, because I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. When I reached my apartment, I dropped the folder on the coffee table and sank into the couch. My phone buzzed again. It was Nina. A text this time. One more thing you should know, your family's been using that house for business. Emily's been hosting clients there, passing it off as hers. I stared at the screen, a cold laugh escaping me. Of course she had. My sister, the designer, playing host in the home I paid for, posing as if she owned it. Let her enjoy it while she can, I typed back. Nina replied almost immediately, I'll draft the paperwork tomorrow. I didn't respond. I just sat there, letting the silence fill the room. Through the window, the rain softened into mist again, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of grays and golds. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I stood at the bottom of their priorities, somewhere between utility and invisibility. They'd stolen moments, money, and dignity one favor at a time. But they couldn't steal the clarity of knowing exactly who I was and what I owned. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood by the window watching the river far below twist through the city. For years I'd been their safety net, their backup plan. Not anymore. Tomorrow I'd start the process of reclaiming what was mine. They'd built their comfort on my silence, my savings, my willingness to stay small. But silence had an end. They wanted me gone from the picture. Fine. I'd step out and take the frame with me. The rain stopped. The sky cracked open just enough for a slice of sunlight to hit the window pane. It flashed across my reflection-tired eyes, steady jaw, a woman who'd finally learned that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs paperwork. I smiled faintly. They thought they'd erased me. But I was just getting ready to write the next chapter, and this time the ink was mine. Sunday morning felt colder than it should have. The sky over West Lynn was pale and low, the kind of gray that seeps into your mood. I drove in silence, hands tight on the wheel, the folder of documents resting on the passenger seat beside me. The air inside the car smelled faintly of rain and coffee, but underneath it all was something heavier: anticipation. When I turned onto my parents' street, everything looked exactly the same. The manicured lawns, the trimmed hedges, the white mailbox that still bore our last name in fading black letters, Mitchell. For a second, it almost felt like coming home. Then I remembered it wasn't. Their two-story house stood quiet, blinds drawn. I parked in the driveway, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment watching the front door. My heart beat slow and steady, not from fear but from restraint. I wasn't there to yell or cry. I was there to end a pattern. I rang the bell once, twice. The door opened a crack, and Mom's face appeared. She looked surprised, no uneasy. "Laura," she said, her voice clipped. "What a surprise." I stepped forward before she could decide whether to invite me in. "Morning, Mom," I said, brushing past her into the house. She hesitated, then closed the door behind me. "You could have called." "Would you have answered?" I asked. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast. Dad sat at the table, the newspaper folded neatly in front of him, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when I entered, the faintest frown crossing his face. "Laura," he said, like my name was a question. Emily was there too, lounging on the couch with her phone in hand. Her blonde hair was curled, her nails a perfect coral. She looked up, startled, then rolled her eyes. "Oh, great," she muttered. I ignored her and placed the folder on the table. "We need to talk." Mom crossed her arms. "Laura, if this is about the wedding, it's not," I said. My voice came out sharper than I expected. "It's about the house." That got their attention. Dad lowered his paper. "What about it?" I opened the folder and slid the deed across the table toward him. "The Lake Oswego property," I said. "It's mine, always has been." Mom blinked, confused for a second before her expression tightened. "What are you talking about?" "You remember 5 years ago," I said evenly. "You couldn't get approved for the loan, so I bought it. Paid every cent. You said you'd handle the paperwork, the taxes, the maintenance. You've been renting it out and collecting the income ever since." Her jaw set. "That house was for the family." "Then why is it filed under your name on the rental listings?" I asked. Emily shifted on the couch, her voice low but cutting. "Oh my God, are you really bringing this up? You're so dramatic." I turned to her. "Dramatic?" I laughed, quiet and cold. "You hosted your clients there, Emily. You used my house to impress them. You built your reputation off something that doesn't even belong to you." Her smirk faltered. "You're overreacting." I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. "You lied about the wedding date. You had Mom send me the wrong invitation because you didn't want me there. That's not overreacting. That's betrayal." Silence fell over the room. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent. Mom finally spoke. "We just wanted peace that day. You always have to make everything about you." I almost laughed. You mean I make everything inconvenient for you? There's a difference. Dad cleared his throat. Let's all calm down. This isn't the time or place. Really, I interrupted. Because this seems like the perfect time to talk about how you've all been living off my money for years. He looked down the newspaper, crumpling slightly in his hands. I'm done being your safety net, I said. My voice was calm now, almost too calm. From this point on, I'm taking back control of what's mine. Mom's eyes narrowed. Control, Laura. That house was meant to keep our family close. Funny, I said, considering you've spent most of your energy keeping me out. Emily stood her tone defensive. We didn't mean to hurt you, okay? You're just... She hesitated, searching for the word intimidating. You make everything a competition. I stared at her, genuinely stunned. You're serious, she lifted her chin. You've always had everything figured out. The job, the money, the attitude. I just wanted one thing that was mine. My throat tightened, but I didn't let the emotion show. So you stole it. Her face reddened. That's not what You used me, I said quietly. All of you did. And you still think you're the victims. Mom stepped between us. Stop twisting this. You've become so cold, Laura. You don't understand what family means anymore. Family, I repeated, almost whispering the word. Family doesn't erase you. It doesn't take your money and pretend you don't exist. Family doesn't throw you away when you're no longer convenient. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with everything we'd never said. Dad set the paper aside. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice weary. Nothing, I said. That's the point. I picked up the folder again and pulled out a second sheet. This is a notice of ownership. Effective today, I'm reclaiming the property. You'll stop renting it out immediately. Any continued use will be considered illegal and my lawyer will handle it. Mom's mouth fell open. You wouldn't. I already did. Emily let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. You're unbelievable. You'd rather ruin everything than forgive a mistake. Forgive? I met her gaze. Forgiveness comes after honesty. You haven't even said you're sorry. Her face hardened. Maybe I'm not. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and turned toward the door. Laura, wait, Mom said. Her voice wavered now. You can't just walk away from your family. I stopped, one hand on the doorknob. You did that for me a long time ago. For a moment no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rain starting up again outside. I opened the door and stepped into the cold air. Behind me, Mom's voice rose sharp and desperate. Laura, don't do this, I turned once, meeting her eyes. I already did. The door closed softly behind me. Outside, the rain hit my face like tiny needles. I took a deep breath, the air smelling like wet pine and freedom. I walked to the car, my shoes splashing through puddles. As I reached the driver's seat, my phone buzzed. A message from Nina lit up the screen, just got confirmation. They've been renting the property for profit under their names. We can move forward legally whenever you're ready. I smiled to myself, the smallest, calmest smile I'd felt in months. Let's start today, I typed back. When I looked up, the clouds were breaking apart, thin sunlight, spilling across the wet pavement. The world looked clean washed of its lies. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the daughter trying to earn her place. I felt like the woman reclaiming it. The next afternoon, I sat across from Nina in her office, the rain outside streaking down the tall glass windows like ink. She had my folder spread open on her desk, each page marked with neat yellow tabs. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. I felt strangely calm, like the storm inside me had settled into purpose. This, Nina said, tapping the top sheet, is proof of ownership. You bought the Lake Oswego property outright. No liens, no co-signers, no shared title. It's yours in every legal sense. I nodded slowly. And they've been treating it like theirs for years. She leaned back, crossing her arms. Not just treating it like theirs. They've been making money off it. My head snapped up. What do you mean I pulled public tax records? Nina said. Your parents have been filing the house as a family rental, listing themselves as owners for income reporting. And your sister's business website lists it as one of her client retreat spaces. For a moment, I just stared at her. The sound of rain against glass filled the silence. So I said quietly, they've been renting my house, under their name. Exactly. A laugh escaped my throat, sharp and humorless. They never stop surprising me. Nina slid another paper across the desk. It gets worse. Your mom used copies of your old financial statements, bank letters, from when you first bought the place to apply for a small equity loan. It's not large, but it's still under your asset. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She used my property as collateral. Nina nodded. It's technically fraud. She must have kept the scanned copies from when you trusted her with the closing documents. I remembered that day vividly. 5 years ago, I'd sat at their kitchen table signing paperwork while Mom fussed about insurance forms. Let me keep the copies, she'd said. I'll handle the paperwork for you. I hadn't even blinked. God, I whispered. She really did handle it. Nina's voice softened. They've been relying on your generosity so long they think it's entitlement. But this crossed a line. I stared down at the papers at my name, printed in black and white, under the county seal. Owner Laura Mitchell. The proof was there, undeniable. Every square inch of that house, every plank, every tile, every inch of lakefront belonged to me. What do we do? I asked. Nina straightened. First, we send a cease and desist to stop them from renting or using the property commercially. Then we freeze any rental account linked to their name. Once that's done, we'll file a formal notice of ownership with the registry. I nodded. Do it. She smiled faintly. I already have the drafts ready. Watching her gather the documents felt surreal. Each sound, the rustle of paper, the click of her pen, felt like reclaiming tiny pieces of myself. When she slid the papers across for my signature, I hesitated only for a second before signing. My name looped in steady ink at the bottom of each page. Nina looked up. You're taking your power back, Laura. About time, I said quietly. She gave a single nod, her expression unreadable but proud. By tomorrow, they'll be officially notified. You should expect a reaction. I smiled, small but sure. I'm counting on it. When I left her office, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. I walked to my car feeling lighter but also strangely hollow. I'd spent so many years being their safety net that cutting the cord felt like stepping into a void. Freedom wasn't weightless. It was heavy in its own way. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the paperwork spread out before me. I read every word again, tracing my signature like a mantra. The clock ticked softly in the background. My laptop pinged a new email from the property management company. Dear Miss Mitchell, we've received notice of ownership change for the Lake Oswego residence. Per your request, rental funds will now be deposited directly to your account effective immediately. Please confirm the new payment information. I typed my reply firm and precise, confirmed. All future transactions must go through me personally. When I hit send, the weight in my chest loosened. It was done. The next morning, as I was finishing a call with a client, my phone lit up again, Nina's name flashing across the screen. They called, she said when I answered. Who, your parents? They're furious. Your mother's threatening to sue for family rights. I laughed softly. She doesn't have any. She doesn't, Nina agreed. But she's angry. She called me unethical, said I was poisoning her daughter. She's right about one thing I said. I am poisoned, just not by you. Nina's voice softened. They're panicking, Laura. That's what happens when people lose control of the person they use to manipulate. I walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Let them panic. I've lived in that feeling long enough. When we hung up, I stood there for a while, watching the clouds drift apart, sunlight spilling over the skyline. Around noon, another email arrived, this time from the tenants currently staying at the lake house. Hi, Laura. We just received notice that our payments are being redirected to you. Mrs. Mitchell stopped by this morning and seemed upset. She said there's been a mistake. I exhaled slowly, a laugh slipping out despite myself. Of course she did, I replied. No mistake. I'm the legal owner. Please don't communicate with her about the property moving forward. The send button glowed blue, and when I pressed it, something inside me clicked into place. Later that evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city below buzzed with weekend life cars, laughter, neon reflections, and puddles. I felt detached from it all, but not lonely. For once, solitude wasn't a punishment. I opened my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd taken years ago, the lake house at sunset, water glimmering gold beneath the trees. I'd almost forgotten how beautiful it was. The image filled the screen, soft and serene. Mine, I thought. For the first time, the word didn't feel selfish, it felt right. I closed the photo and leaned back. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look at it right away. When I finally did, it was another message from Nina. Heads up, your mom's already called the management company twice today. She's insisting she owns the house. I'll handle it, but brace yourself. This might get noisy. I smiled, sipping the wine. Let it get noisy, I texted back. I'm done whispering. Outside, the sky had cleared completely. The reflection of the moon shimmered in the windows across the street. I thought of how long I'd spent giving them everything money forgiveness time, thinking it would make me part of them again. It never did. Now, for the first time, I wasn't chasing belonging. I was standing in my own story, holding the proof in ink and paper. They had built their comfort on my silence. But silence, like any loan, eventually comes due. I raised my glass toward the window, toward the faint reflection of my own face, and whispered, to the truth. Finally, the wine caught the moonlight, deep red and calm. It didn't taste like victory. It tasted like freedom. By Monday morning, I was sitting in Nina's office again. The same gray light pouring through the windows, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, precise, like the start of something sharp. She had the printer running, spitting out pages one after another. The faint smell of toner filled the air. All right, she said, gathering the stack. These are ready to go. Notice of ownership, cease and desist, and a property access restriction letter. Once these are filed and served, they'll have no legal claim, no entry rights, nothing. I nodded steady. Good. She looked at me for a moment, her expression softening. How are you holding up? I took a breath. Better than I expected. Worse than I deserve. Nina smiled faintly. That's an honest answer. I watched her staple the documents neatly, every motion deliberate, methodical. The rhythm of it grounded me. I keep thinking I said quietly that I shouldn't need to do this, that family shouldn't require paperwork. Family shouldn't require a lawyer either, she said gently, but here we are. Her words landed with a strange sort of comfort. She slid the papers toward me. Sign here, initial here and here. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but my signature came out smooth, strong lines, no hesitation. When the last page was done, Nina sealed the folder. By noon, they'll be notified. I stared at the folder for a long second, then said, let them know what losing me looks like. She didn't respond, but I caught the flicker of approval in her eyes. Outside, the day brightened. The rain had stopped completely, the air washed clean. I walked to my car with a strange lightness, the kind that comes after you've made peace with the fight ahead. By the time I got home, the first email had already arrived from the property management firm, confirming that all rental payments were rerouted to my trust. Then another cease and desist notice successfully delivered to the Mitchell residence. I sat at my kitchen counter reading both messages twice. No triumph, no celebration, just a quiet certainty. My phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I answered. Laura, she began, her voice trembling. What did you do? I reclaimed. What's mine? That house belongs to all of us, she snapped, her composure cracking. It's family property. No, Mom, I said calmly. It's mine. I paid for it. I maintained it. You used it. There's a difference. Her breathing grew uneven. "How could you be so cruel after everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. "Everything you've done for me," she ignored that, her voice rising. "You're tearing this family apart." "No, Mom," I said, my voice low and measured. "You did that when you lied." There was a long silence on the line. Then quietly she said, "You'll regret this." I hung up before she could hear me say, "No, I won't." An hour later, Nina called. "Well," she said, "that didn't take long. Your mom just phoned my office, said I was manipulating you, that you're too emotional to make legal decisions." I laughed softly. "You'd think I've never read a contract before." "She's desperate," Nina said. "They always call the lawyer the villain when they lose control." "Let them," I said. "I've played that role my whole life." That evening, another message came through, this time from Emily. "You're punishing Mom and Dad. You've already got your big career and your fancy apartment. Why can't you just let them have one thing?" I typed slowly, carefully. "They had everything, my money, my patience, my silence. I'm not taking from them. I'm just done giving." I hit send, then turned my phone face down. For the first time in years, there was no sense of guilt pressing on my chest. Tuesday morning, I met with Robert Klein, the financial advisor Nina recommended. His office was quiet, lined with certificates and dark wood. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with calm eyes that had seen every kind of mess. He flipped through the new account summaries and nodded. "You've done the right thing," he said. "All joint assets are now separated. The property's under your name alone, and their access to any shared credit line has been terminated." "When does that take effect?" I asked. He checked his watch. "About 20 minutes ago." I smiled. "Then today's going to be interesting for them." Robert chuckled, not unkindly. "This isn't about revenge, Miss Mitchell. It's about control. There's a difference." "I know," I said, "but sometimes control looks a lot like justice." When the paperwork was done, I shook his hand and thanked him. On my way out, I passed a mirror in the hallway and caught my reflection, shoulders back, eyes clear. I looked older somehow, not in years, but in steadiness. Back home, my phone was buzzing again. I ignored it for a while until curiosity got the better of me. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and 1 text from Emily. They can't access their accounts. "What did you do?" I typed back. "Actions have consequences." Then I silenced my phone and went to make dinner. The quiet felt strange but peaceful. No more midnight calls about overdue bills, no more emotional blackmail disguised as family need. Just quiet. As I stirred the pasta on the stove, the landline rang. The sound startled me. It was the number only a handful of people had. I answered without thinking. "Hello, Laura, it's your father." His voice was low, rough. "Your mother's sick over this. She hasn't stopped crying. Can we please just talk?" I held the phone to my ear, my pulse steady. "You should have talked to me before you cut me out of your lives," he sighed. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." Another silence. I could hear Mom crying faintly in the background, her voice muffled. "Tell her," I said softly, "that the next time she wants to cry, she should start with the truth." "Laura, please," I hung up. The pot on the stove hissed. The smell of garlic filled the room. I took the pan off the heat, leaned against the counter, and exhaled slowly. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city glowing beneath me. Somewhere, I imagined the scene unfolding in their house: panic, confusion, anger. The power dynamic had flipped, and for once, I wasn't on the losing end. Nina texted just before midnight. "Everything filed. Funds secure. They can't touch a dime." "Thank you," I replied, "for helping me do this right." "You did it right," she wrote back. "I just handed you the pen." I set my phone down and stared out at the skyline. The lights blurred slightly, the wind brushing my hair across my face. For years, I'd been afraid of what would happen if I stopped being their savior. Tonight, I found out. The world didn't collapse. It just got quieter. I lifted my glass toward the sky. "To peace," I whispered. The city didn't answer, but it didn't have to. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't need applause. It just existed, steady and silent, like the sound of my own breathing in a life that finally belonged to me. By Friday morning, the decision was made. No more shared accounts, no more emergency transfers, no more quiet rescues behind the scenes. I walked into Robert Klein's office just after 10, the winter light cutting across the glass walls. He greeted me with the same calm efficiency as before, a folder already open on his desk. "Morning, Miss Mitchell," he said. "You're ready to finalize the disconnections, I said. He nodded, clicking through a few screens on his monitor. "Once we process these forms, your parents will no longer have access to the joint credit line investment portfolio or any shared loan you co-signed. Everything will revert to your sole ownership." I leaned forward, my elbows on the desk. "Let's get it done." As he explained each document, I signed them one by one. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in months. When we reached the final page, Robert paused. "This will officially terminate all financial ties. Are you sure you don't want to give them notice first?" I looked up at him. "They gave me notice when they erased me." He didn't ask again. The printer hummed quietly, and he sealed the paperwork in a single envelope. "You're free, Miss Mitchell," he said, sliding it toward me. The word lingered, free. When I left his office, the air outside felt lighter. I walked a few blocks before realizing I'd been smiling the entire time. By noon, the updates began hitting. Notifications from the bank, the investment firm, the property manager, each confirming transfers, completed, authorizations revoked. The little chime from my phone became a rhythm of liberation. Back home, I poured myself a cup of tea and opened my laptop. A new email from the bank popped up. Shared credit line closed successfully. Final statement attached. I clicked it open, scrolling through rows of transactions. Every time they dipped into the account, every quiet withdrawal they'd assumed I'd never question. They never thought I'd stop them. The phone rang. Mom's number flashed on the screen. I didn't pick up. A few minutes later, another call. Then another. I silenced the phone and leaned back on the couch. I imagined her pacing the kitchen, voice rising, Dad, trying to calm her down while pretending he hadn't been part of it all. By mid-afternoon, a text finally came through from Emily. "You froze their accounts. Are you serious?" Mom's crying. "Dad's losing it. You've gone too far." I typed back slowly. "You're upset they can't keep spending money that isn't theirs. You'll get over it." The 3 dots appeared, blinked, disappeared. Then came another message. "You're heartless." I stared at it for a moment, then replied, "No, Emily, I'm done being heartbroken." I set the phone down and exhaled. The quiet in my apartment felt different now, not lonely, just peaceful. That evening, Nina called. "How are you holding up?" I smiled faintly. "Fine. I think Mom's working through all 5 stages of grief right now." She called me again, Nina said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Said I was ruining your family. I told her I don't ruin families, I help people see what's already broken." I laughed softly. "I hope you billed her for the call." Tempting, Nina said. "Listen, you did the right thing. They've been living off your fear of being the bad guy. Now you've shown them you're not afraid." I swirled the tea in my cup, the reflection of the city lights rippling across the surface. "Funny thing is, I don't feel like a bad guy. I just feel balanced," good Nina said. "That's what justice feels like when it's clean." After we hung up, I turned off my phone and let the apartment go quiet again. The heater hummed softly, the city outside murmuring beneath it. Around 7, I got another email from Robert. "Final confirmation. All joint financial assets have been separated. Accounts secured. No outstanding obligations remain." I read it twice, letting the words sink in. No obligations. I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, just breathing. For years I'd carried their weight, always waiting for the next emergency. The next call that started with Laura. "We need your help." The constant sense of duty had woven itself into my identity. Now with a few signatures, that entire version of me was gone. I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. The phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. Mom's voice came through shaking and frantic. Laura, I don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying us. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Please, honey, just call me. We can fix this. I deleted it before it finished. Later that night, I opened a bottle of wine and took it to the balcony. The air was crisp, cool against my skin. I looked down at the city lights, reflecting off the river, tiny shards of gold flickering in the dark. I'd always thought peace would feel soft. But this peace, it had edges. It was the kind that cut through noise and guilt. I thought about all the years I'd been their lifeline, the one who bailed them out, smoothed things over, made the impossible happen. And I thought about how every time I fixed something, they thanked Emily for keeping the family together. I took a sip of wine and smiled to myself. Let them fix their own lives now. My laptop pinged again, another notification from the bank. Joint investment account successfully closed. At the same moment, my phone lit up with a new message from Dad. Your mother's sick with worry. Please don't do this to her. We're your family. I stared at it, the words blurring slightly under the soft glow of the screen. Family. That word used to mean safety. Now it just sounded like debt. I typed one sentence and sent it. You taught me what family means, Dad. I just finally learned the lesson. The message showed, read a few seconds later. No reply came. Inside, I set the phone on the counter and leaned against the window. My reflection looked back at me, tired but calm. I remembered every late-night phone call, every moment I'd said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I'd mistaken obligation for love. And I realized that this silence wasn't loneliness. It was the sound of boundaries being born. Outside, the wind picked up brushing against the glass. I closed my eyes, let it pass. When I opened them again, I felt light. Free, yes, but also something deeper. Unapologetic. The person they depended on was gone. In her place stood someone they couldn't use anymore. I picked up my phone one last time before bed. Another text had come through, this one from Emily. You've ruined everything. We could lose the lake house. Are you happy now? I typed slowly. No, Emily, I'm not happy. I'm free. I set the phone face down, turned off the light, and watched the reflection of the city fade into the dark. Tomorrow would be the first morning in years I didn't owe anyone anything. And for the first time, that felt like the beginning, not the end. The first signs of their downfall came quietly. An email from the property management company, polite but firm, landed in my inbox on a Monday morning. We've reached out to Mrs. Mitchell several times regarding overdue maintenance fees and unpaid taxes on the Lake Oswego house. Please advise how you'd like to proceed. I sipped my coffee, reading it twice. The tone was neutral, but I could read between the lines chaos. They hadn't paid a dime since I cut them off. I typed back, handle all correspondence through me. They no longer represent this property. By Tuesday, another email arrived, this one from the county office. Late payment notices, tax penalties, interest fees. Every document was addressed to me as the legal owner, but the responsibility was theirs. For years, I'd quietly handled it all, sending checks and smoothing things over. Now the silence on their end was catching up to them. I didn't feel guilty. I felt steady. That afternoon, while I was reviewing a project proposal for work, my phone buzzed. Nina. They're in trouble, she said without preamble. I figured, I replied. What happened? Your parents missed 2 tax deadlines. And Emily, she paused, a touch of disbelief in her voice, apparently lost a $50,000 client last week. The buyer pulled out after finding out she'd been using your property for meetings under false pretenses. I almost laughed. So karma's punctual this time, Nina chuckled softly. Seems so. I leaned back in my chair, watching the rain slide down my office window. They'll blame me for this, I said. They already are, Nina said. But the people who matter will see the truth. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of standing on its own eventually. That evening, as I drove home, the city looked washed clean. Streetlights shimmered on wet pavement. I thought about the years I'd spent patching their lives together, How many late nights I'd driven to their house with checks, groceries, or apologies for problems I hadn't caused. And now here we were. The foundation they'd built on my silence was finally cracking. When I got home, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The reflection staring back at me didn't look angry or triumphant, just still. The next day, the phone calls started. The first one came from Dad. "Laura," he began, his voice strained. "Your mother's losing sleep. We can't pay the property taxes. Why didn't you tell us you switched the accounts?" I closed my laptop and said, "Because they were mine to switch." "You're punishing us," he said, the words brittle. "No," I replied. "I'm just done being punished." He was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear his pride breaking slow and reluctant. "You've made your point," he said finally. "Can we start over?" "Start over?" I repeated. "You mean after the years you took advantage of me, after you erased me from the family, after you lied?" He sighed. "We didn't erase you." I laughed quietly. "Check the wedding photos, Dad." Before he could respond, I hung up. 2 hours later, a text from Emily appeared. "You've made things worse for everyone. Mom's crying every night. I'm trying to fix this, but clients are canceling. Why can't you just help us one last time?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back because every last time turns into the next time. I didn't send anything else. By Friday, word had spread. A colleague mentioned hearing gossip through someone in real estate how the Mitchell family was going through a rough patch. Apparently, Emily's husband had been asking around for bridge loans. Their finances were unraveling faster than I'd imagined. When Nina called again that night, she didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. "You know what they say when you build your house on borrowed ground, the storm doesn't need to be big to wash it away?" I smiled faintly. "I never wanted to see them fail, Nina. I just wanted them to stop using me to stay afloat." "I know," she said. "But sometimes failure is the only teacher people listen to." The following week, I got a text from an old family friend, Margaret. "Laura, I ran into your mother at the store. She seemed off. Told everyone you took the family house from them. People are starting to talk." I exhaled. "Let them talk," I replied. I wasn't going to defend myself anymore. The truth didn't need a press release. The next morning, I stopped by the local cafe near my office. As I waited for my drink, I overheard 2 women at the next table. "It's such a shame," one said. "After everything she did for them, they turned on her." "Can you imagine?" The other woman shook her head. "That family's been using her for years. Everyone knows." Their voices faded into the hum of the espresso machine, but for the first time in months, I felt something unexpected: vindication. Later that day, Nina called with an update. "It's official," she said. "The county has confirmed your ownership. The Mitchells have no legal claims, no appeal rights." I stared out the window at the skyline, the river glinting in the distance. "It's over then." "It's over," she said, "at least on paper." The following weekend, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from an unfamiliar address. I opened it. "Subject, please, Laura." The message was short. "We're selling the house in West Lynn. We can't keep up with the bills. Could we stay at the lake house for a few months, just until things settle?" It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to check. I knew my mother's phrasing anywhere. I closed the email without replying. That night, I walked out onto my balcony, a cold wind brushing against my face. The city below shimmered under streetlights, calm and endless. I thought about all the years I'd carried them, how every solution I'd offered only made them need me more. This time, I wasn't saving them. A week later, a friend from Lake Oswego called. "Your parents are selling furniture out front," she said quietly. "Looks like they're really moving." I thanked her and hung up. I sat down at my desk and opened my journal. For the first time, I didn't write about pain or betrayal. I wrote about balance, how justice didn't always need noise, how silence could be its own kind of power. Outside, the evening light faded over the city. I thought about that lake house, the same one they'd treated like a trophy, the same one that had become the stage for my awakening. They were losing everything they'd built on deceit, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. As I closed the journal, I noticed something sticking out between the pages, an old yellowed envelope. My name written in my mother's cursive. It was the wedding invitation, the one she'd mailed with the wrong date. I hadn't thrown it away after all. I looked at it for a long moment, then slipped it back into the drawer and closed it gently. Some things didn't deserve fire or fury, just forgetting. When I turned off the lights that night, the city outside shimmered in the dark, quiet and steady. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the world had finally caught up to the truth. The headline caught my eye before I even finished my morning coffee. Local designer couple faces financial trouble after family feud. The photo beneath it was of Emily and her husband both smiling stiffly at some charity event from years ago. I stared at the article for a long moment, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. The reporter quoted my mother, of course. "We just want peace," she'd said. Our oldest daughter turned her back on us when we needed her most. Success changed her. I laughed under my breath, the sound dry and sharp. Success hadn't changed me, truth had. My phone buzzed a minute later. "Nina, have you seen it?" she asked without preamble. "I'm looking at it right now," I figured. They must have gone to the press last night. The article paints them as victims, tragic parents abandoned by their selfish daughter. I sipped my coffee. They always liked drama. Nina hesitated, her voice softening. "Do you want me to issue a statement?" I looked at the screen again, reading my mother's words one more time. "We only ever wanted what's best for her." "No," I said finally. "Let them talk. The truth doesn't need a microphone." When we hung up, I scrolled through the comments section under the article. Some people sympathized with my parents, others didn't. One caught my attention. "If you ask me, sounds like she finally set some boundaries. Good for her." I smiled just a little. By noon, my inbox was full, old friends, acquaintances, even a few journalists wanting to hear my side. I didn't reply to any of them. I wasn't interested in headlines or explanations. For years, I'd lived my life through their version of events. Now I didn't owe anyone a story. That afternoon, I stopped by Nina's office. She had a copy of the local paper folded neatly on her desk. "They're desperate," she said, tapping the article. "They're trying to control the narrative because they can't control you." I took the paper, scanning the lines again. "It's strange," I said quietly. "For so long, I thought their approval defined me. Now their disapproval feels like freedom." Nina smiled. "That's how you know you're finally out." As I left her office, the air outside smelled like rain and something clean like a reset. But the storm wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I walked into the coffee shop near my apartment and felt the shift immediately. People turned, whispering. A woman at the counter smiled at me nervously, as if she wasn't sure whether to pity or praise me. I ordered my drink and pretended not to notice. As I reached for my cup, a man behind me said, "Hey, you're that woman from the article, right? The one who took her parents' house." I turned to face him. He looked harmless enough, mid-40s, curious but not cruel. "That's me," I said evenly. He blinked, maybe expecting denial. "Just wanted to say," he added, "good for you. People forget boundaries are part of love." I nodded, thanked him, and left. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering damp leaves across the sidewalk. I thought about how easily stories twist when they're told by the loudest voice. But I didn't need to fight for volume anymore. My piece spoke louder. Later that week, another article dropped, this time about Emily's business. Design firm under investigation for misrepresentation. Apparently, a client had discovered she'd been hosting them at her lake property, the one under my name. I sat at my kitchen table reading the story, the irony almost too rich. My family had tried to humiliate me in public, and in doing so exposed themselves. That night, Nina called again. "They're unraveling fast," she said. "Emily's firm is bleeding clients. And your parents' word is their house is on the market. They're drowning in debt." I leaned back in my chair. I didn't have to lift a finger. "Karma's got good aim," Nina said. But I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't angry either, just done. When we hung up, I turned off the lights and stood by the window watching the city below. Cars moved like slow streams of light, people crossing streets under umbrellas, life going on as if none of this mattered, and maybe in the grand scheme it didn't. My reflection in the glass looked calm but older somehow. Stronger. They were losing everything they'd built on lies, and I wasn't even part of the story anymore. The next morning, an envelope slid under my office door. No name, just heavy paper and neat handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of the latest article, and on the back, a handwritten note in my mother's cursive. "You've won. Are you happy now?" I sat down holding the note for a moment before setting it aside. Happiness wasn't the right word. Peace was. Around noon, I met Nina for lunch. "You look different," she said as we sat down. "Lighter," I said. Like I finally stopped carrying a weight that wasn't mine. "You know they'll keep trying," Nina said. "The public guilt, the manipulation, it doesn't stop overnight." "I know," I said, stirring my drink. "But I'm not playing anymore." When I got home later, another email awaited me, this time from a major paper. "We'd like to offer you a chance to share your perspective. Your story could help others who've experienced family betrayal." I stared at it for a while, then closed it without replying. I didn't need a platform to validate what I already knew. That evening, I took a walk by the river. The air was crisp, the water dark and steady. A couple sat on a bench nearby, sharing a quiet conversation. I caught snippets, something about forgiveness, about starting over. I smiled faintly. Forgiveness. That word used to mean surrender. Now it meant release. My phone buzzed again, a new voicemail from Dad. His voice was tired, almost hollow. "Laura," he said, "we're not the same without you. Maybe that's what we deserve. Your mother misses you. Please, call her." I let the message play out, then deleted it. As the sun dipped low, painting the water in streaks of orange, I felt an ache. Not sadness exactly, but the echo of what used to be love. The kind that had been stretched too thin, twisted too far. They were still my family by name, but not by bond. And maybe that was okay. When I reached my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The sky outside turned violet, the first stars appearing one by one. I thought of the house in Lake Oswego, the way the light hit the water at dusk, the smell of cedar, the sound of wind through the trees. They'd taken that house for granted, just like they had me. Now both were mine again, quiet, steady, untouchable. I whispered to the empty room. Let them shout. The truth doesn't shout back. The words felt like closure, not defiance. My phone vibrated one last time that night, a notification from my lawyer's office. Notice Mitchell family attempting to file a property dispute. Hearing scheduled next month. I smiled, slow and certain. One last performance, I said to myself. Then I set the phone down, finished my wine, and watched the city lights blink awake, calm, unbothered, and untouchable, just like me. The courthouse in downtown Portland smelled like rain and old wood. I arrived early, the hallway nearly empty, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of my heels on the tile. My palms were dry, my heartbeat even. I'd expected nerves, maybe anger, but all I felt was clarity. Nina met me by the bench outside courtroom 4B. She wore a dark suit and that same composed expression that made people underestimate her until she spoke. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for years," I said. She gave a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then, let's finish this." Inside the room was cold, almost sterile. My parents sat on the opposite side of the aisle. Dad looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders rounded. Mom's hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin beneath them pale. Emily wasn't there. Maybe she couldn't face it. Maybe she didn't care. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of the gavel echoed once clean and final. Their attorney, a man I'd never seen before, stood and launched into a rehearsed statement about family intention and misunderstood agreements. He spoke about shared responsibility, emotional investments, unspoken understandings. His tone was soft, almost pleading, like he was telling a sad story instead of presenting a case. When it was Nina's turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Your Honor, she said evenly, the property in question was purchased solely by my client, Miss Laura Mitchell. She covered the down payment, closing costs, and all taxes and maintenance expenses for the last 5 years. There are no co-signers, no shared accounts, and no written agreements transferring ownership. The plaintiffs, her parents, have resided there by her permission alone. They've also profited from renting it out illegally under their own names. She handed the judge a neat folder of documents, each one labeled and tabbed. The judge flipped through them, slowly, occasionally adjusting his glasses. Mrs. Mitchell, he said at last, looking at my mother. Is this true? She shifted in her seat. We managed the house for her, she said, voice trembling slightly. It was always meant to be a family property. Laura never said we couldn't. Nina stepped forward. Intentions don't override ownership, Your Honor. And as you can see here, she tapped a page. Miss Mitchell filed official notice of ownership months ago, long before this suit. The judge nodded. I see. Dad cleared his throat. We're not trying to take anything from her, he said, his voice low and tired. We just want fairness. Nina didn't flinch. Fairness isn't measured in guilt, Mr. Mitchell. It's measured in law. The room went quiet. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. The judge leaned back, hands folded. The evidence is clear. Ownership rests solely with Miss Laura Mitchell. Any continued claim to the property will be dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck once, the sound crisp and absolute. For a second, no one moved. Mom's eyes widened, her hand gripping Dad's arm. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Then, without looking at me, they stood and left the room. Nina gathered the papers, calmly sliding them back into her briefcase. Congratulations, she said quietly. It's official. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I didn't think I'd feel anything. You will, she said. Just give it time. When we stepped outside, the sky had turned a muted silver snow, falling in light, slow flakes. I tilted my head back and let them land on my face. They melted instantly, cold and clean. Nina tucked her hands into her pockets. You're free of them now, at least financially. Freedom feels strange, I said. It always does. We said our goodbyes by the courthouse steps. She headed toward her car while I stood there, watching people hurry past, bundled in coats and scarves. Life kept moving, indifferent to who had won or lost inside that courtroom. By evening, I drove to the Lake Oswego house for the first time in months. The snow had stopped, leaving the roads slick and quiet. The house looked the same from the outside, tall windows reflecting the lake, cedar siding darkened by moisture, but it felt different. The air around it was still stripped of the energy it used to hold when my parents filled it with noise and pretense. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The echo of my footsteps bounced through the empty space. They'd already cleared out their things, no more family photos, no more floral curtains, just bare walls and sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. I walked through each room slowly, the living room where they'd hosted parties, the kitchen where I'd once helped Mom decorate a cake, the guest room where Emily used to stay when her marriage was falling apart. All of it hollow, now stripped clean. In the corner of the living room, I found a single box they'd left behind. Inside was a framed photo me at 16, smiling beside Emily at some forgotten family barbecue. I stared at it for a long time, then set it face down on the counter. This house wasn't their symbol anymore. It was mine. As the sun dipped lower, I opened the back doors and stepped out onto the deck. The lake stretched before me, glassy and still. A few ducks glided across the surface, leaving ripples that faded into the distance. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the cold air. It's over, I whispered. But it didn't sound like victory, it sounded like peace. A car door slammed somewhere nearby, and I turned. Nina stood by her car, holding a bottle of wine. Thought you might need this, she called out. I laughed softly and walked down to meet her. You didn't have to drive all the way here. Didn't want you drinking alone on your first day of freedom, she said, handing me the bottle. We sat on the deck, sipping wine straight from the bottle, our breath turning to mist in the cold air. To freedom, she said, raising the bottle. To lessons learned, I replied. Expensive ones, she smiled. The best ones always are. We talked for a while about everything and nothing: the trial, her upcoming cases, the way snow made everything look softer than it was. When she finally left, I stood on the deck again, staring out at the lake. Inside the house, it was quiet, peaceful. Mine. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new message. I hesitated before checking it. We lost everything, Laura. I don't know how to fix this. I hope someday you can forgive us. It was from Emily. I read it twice, then set the phone down. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give on demand. It had to grow on its own, slow and honest. And maybe it would. But not tonight. I walked back to the window, the moonlight casting long silver streaks across the floor. My reflection in the glass looked calm, unburdened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I gave or what they took. This house, this peace, this silence, it all belonged to me, and I intended to keep it that way. 6 months later, the lake looked different. The water was calmer, clearer, reflecting a wide stretch of blue sky instead of the gray storms that had hung there last winter. I sat on the porch of the Lake Oswego house, with a mug of tea in my hands, watching sunlight dance on the surface. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It was mine in every sense of the word. The last few months had been a strange kind of peace. No phone calls, no guilt-laced messages, no sudden emergencies that required my bank account to save the day. Just silence, and in that silence, I'd learned how to breathe again. I started working remotely for a new firm, designing sustainable projects that actually made me feel proud. I planted herbs by the kitchen window, replaced the heavy curtains with soft linen, and let light pour into spaces that had been closed for too long. Some mornings I'd wake up expecting the old reflex, the urge to check if someone needed something from me, but it passed faster each week. What replaced it wasn't bitterness. It was something lighter, gratitude maybe. One afternoon in April, Nina came by. She parked her car by the dock and waved up at me with that easy confidence of hers. "You look annoyingly serene," she teased as she climbed the steps. "I'm learning how to do nothing," I said, smiling. "Turns out it's harder than it sounds." She laughed, setting down a bottle of wine. "You've earned it. You know not everyone gets to start over this completely." "I didn't start over," I said quietly. "I just stopped going in circles." We sat outside for hours talking about everything but the past, the wildflowers coming in by the lake, a new client she'd taken on a podcast she thought I'd love. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. "You're different, Laura," she said. "You're lighter." I watched her drive off down the gravel road, the sound of her car fading into the distance. She was right. I was lighter, because for the first time in years I wasn't carrying them anymore. That night, I found an old journal tucked in one of the boxes I'd brought from the apartment. Inside were pages filled with restless handwriting lists of things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, goals I'd written but never pursued. I smiled at the version of myself who thought she had to wait for permission to live. At the bottom of one page, written in younger, more hopeful handwriting, were the words, "Be someone I'd be proud to meet." I whispered them out loud, letting the sound fill the room. "I think I made it," I said to the empty house. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, looping, deliberate. My mother's. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. She said they'd sold the West Lynn house, that Dad wasn't well, that Emily had moved to a smaller apartment with her husband. There was no apology, not really. Just a line that caught my breath. "We thought control was love. Maybe we were wrong." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the drawer by my desk. I didn't feel anger anymore, just an ache for what could have been. But some wounds weren't meant to reopen. They were meant to remind. That evening I sat outside again, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air was soft and warm, carrying the faint scent of pine. A pair of ducks glided by, leaving quiet ripples behind them. I thought about all the versions of myself that had led here: the desperate daughter, the exhausted provider, the woman who mistook loyalty for love. Each one had taught me something necessary. Forgiveness wasn't about letting them back in. It was about letting myself go free. The wind rustled through the trees and I smiled. "I forgive you," I whispered, though they'd never hear it. "And I forgive me too." Later that week, I met Nina for lunch in the city. She listened as I told her about the letter, about the quiet days, about how strange it felt not to be waiting for the next crisis. When I finished, she tilted her head. "So what now?" she asked. "I'm thinking of turning the lake house into a retreat," I said. "A place for people like me, people who need to start over without apology." She grinned. "A poetic ending. From survival to sanctuary." Something like that. Driving home, the road curved along the water, the sunlight flashing between the trees. I rolled down the window and let the wind tangle my hair. The air smelled like cedar and freedom. When I got back to the house, a single envelope waited by the door, no return address. Inside was a photo. Me and Emily standing together as kids by a birthday cake, both laughing faces smeared with frosting. On the back in her handwriting were 3 words: "I'm sorry, Laura." I stood there for a long time, the photo trembling slightly in my hand. The apology I'd waited years for had finally arrived, quiet and small, wrapped in a moment that no longer hurt. I placed it in the same drawer as my mother's letter. Some things were better kept as reminders of how far you've come, not how far you've fallen. That night I sat by the water again. The moon hung low, the lake rippling in silver light. I thought of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the silence, the courtroom, the release. It all led here. Peace wasn't something I'd found, it was something I'd built. As the breeze moved across the water, I whispered to myself, "This is what starting over looks like." The house behind me glowed softly in the dark. My life quiet, unbothered mine. If anyone had told me a year ago that losing everything I thought was love would lead me here, I wouldn't have believed them. But sometimes life burns down the wrong things, so we can finally see the truth in the ashes. I picked up my phone and opened the recording app. To anyone listening, I began my voice steady, calm. If you've ever been erased by the people who were supposed to love you, know this. You're not the absence they left behind. You're the space that waits for something better. I paused, letting the words settle before adding, "Share your story if you need to. Someone out there needs to hear it." Then I stopped the recording, saved it, and set the phone down. The night was still. The world didn't owe me applause, and I didn't need any. I closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet, knowing I'd finally reached the ending I'd been searching for all along. Not revenge, not justice. Peace.